He walks out of the silo feeling fine. A little cough, maybe some irritation in his throat. Nothing that seemed worth mentioning. 12 hours later, he's dead. This isn't a hypothetical. It's a documented pattern that has repeated itself on American farms for decades, tied to a gas most farmers never learned to fear. Researchers call it silo fillers disease, a form of poisoning from nitrogen dioxide gas that forms naturally inside a freshly filled silo. And it has one specific, terrifying trait. The danger can feel like it's already passed, hours before the real damage begins. In the next few minutes, you'll see exactly how an invisible gas forms inside a structure meant to store food, why victims often feel like they've recovered before the real crisis hits, and what safety research eventually did about it. This is documented agricultural health and safety history, case reports, university extension research, and federal occupational safety records. Sit with that for a second. A structure built to feed livestock could quietly become one of the most dangerous places on the farm. It starts with something that sounds harmless. Freshly cut, chopped crop, packed into a tower to ferment. Modern silos don't just store dry grain. Many store silage, chopped corn or grass, packed in tightly so it ferments into feed for livestock through the winter. Here's the strange part. Almost nobody expects that fermentation process itself is what creates the danger. As the packed plant material begins to ferment, a chemical reaction inside the silage produces nitrogen dioxide gas as a byproduct. None of this requires anything unusual to go wrong. It's simply what happens when the crop itself starts to break down. This gas is heavier than air, which means it doesn't simply drift away. It sinks, pooling in the silo itself, in the chute, and sometimes in attached feed rooms or barns nearby. The most dangerous window, researchers have found, is usually within the first 1 to 3 weeks after a silo is filled, exactly when a farmer has the most reason to go check on it. And the gas doesn't always announce itself the way people expect a dangerous chemical to. At higher concentrations, it can have a sharp, bleach-like smell, but at lower and still dangerous concentrations, the odor can be faint enough to miss entirely. There's no reliable way to tell just by smell alone whether the air in front of you is safe. Here's a detail worth pausing on. The gas itself often has a faint yellowish or reddish-brown tint, but in low light or brief exposure, even that can go unnoticed. Here's the part most people never hear about why this particular gas is so dangerous. A brief exposure often causes immediate but fairly mild symptoms: coughing, throat irritation, maybe some chest tightness. What no one expects is what can happen next. In documented cases, those initial symptoms frequently fade within a few hours, and the person feels essentially back to normal. Then, sometimes as long as 12 to 30 hours later, a second and far more severe reaction can begin: fluid building up in the lungs, a condition known as pulmonary edema. Case reports describe this second phase as the one that actually kills, arriving well after the person believed the danger had already passed. By the time breathing becomes visibly labored, the underlying damage is often already well underway. Notice what makes this so uniquely dangerous. It isn't a gas that overwhelms you instantly. It's one that convinces you you're safe, then proves you wrong hours later. Some documented cases even describe a third phase weeks afterward, as scarring in the lungs from the initial exposure continued to cause complications. Medical researchers reviewing these cases describe the pattern as biphasic, meaning the illness genuinely has 2, sometimes 3, separate acts, not one continuous event. For a farmer without any of this knowledge, there was no reason to seek help after the cough faded. That was the entire problem. But that's not even the detail that surprised early investigators the most. Because the gas sinks and pools, the people at risk weren't only the ones climbing inside the silo itself. Someone standing in an attached room, or even a barn connected to the silo's base, could be exposed without ever setting foot inside the structure. Here's a detail worth pausing on for a moment. Some documented cases involved people who never intended to go anywhere near the silo that day. They were simply working in a space the gas had quietly reached. Researchers studying case after case throughout the mid-20th century began noticing the same pattern. Healthy farmers, no warning signs, exposed doing completely routine chores. University agricultural extension programs and occupational health researchers eventually compiled these cases into a recognizable medical profile. Silo fillers disease became a document-named condition rather than a string of unexplained tragedies. That naming mattered enormously. You can't warn people about a danger nobody has agreed exists yet. Federal occupational safety researchers, working alongside university extension safety programs, began developing specific guidance aimed directly at the mechanism of the danger. Here's where the story turns from tragedy to prevention. None of the fixes that followed required new technology. They required taking the timing and chemistry of the danger seriously enough to build rules around it. The recommendations aimed directly at the physics of the problem, not just general caution. Farmers were advised to run silo blowers for a set period before entering, specifically to clear out the heavier-than-air gas pooling at the bottom. 3 weeks, that's roughly the window extension guidance recommended avoiding unnecessary entry during the first, highest-risk period after filling. Think about how counterintuitive that timing is. The moment a farmer is most eager to check on a freshly filled silo is exactly the moment it's most dangerous to do so. Emergency. That's the word farmers were crucially taught to attach to mild symptoms after silo exposure, not a nuisance to shrug off. That last point directly targeted the exact trap that had killed people for years, the false sense that feeling better meant being safe. Here's what's worth knowing if you've ever driven past a working farm silo without a second thought. Caution, a distinct higher level of it, is still how most modern operations treat the weeks right after filling, for exactly this reason. The safety guidance developed around silo gas didn't come from a single breakthrough. It came from decades of documented cases, patiently compiled until the pattern became impossible to ignore. Here's the last piece of this most retellings skip entirely. Modern silo safety training still opens with the exact same warning researchers settled on decades ago. Feeling fine is not the same as being safe. Notice what actually changed the outcome here. Not a new invention, but the decision to take a delayed, invisible danger as seriously as an obvious one. The chemistry that produces this gas hasn't changed since long before anyone understood it. What changed is how seriously farmers are taught to treat the hours after it forms. That's the real story, documented in case records and safety research, and still shaping how silos are entered on farms today. If you want more of these, the real documented risks and safety history most people never think about, subscribe to The Quiet Farmer and tell us in the comments, had you ever heard of silo filler's disease before this?